In part 1 of this video, we tested 6 different molds in a variety of different plastics to find out how plastic affected stability. But will we find the same conclusions when we test a whole new set of discs? The plastic is in the details. Hey everyone, it's Greg from 6-Sided Discs. If you watched part 1 of this video and you're just here to see these new discs fly, go ahead and click ahead to this time code here. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, stick around while we talk about how plastic plays a role in the flight of a disc. And then go check out part 1. Previously on 6-Sided Discs. To understand how plastic would play a role in how a disc flies, we first have to understand how discs fly. The following explanation is a paraphrasing from scientificamerican.com. There are 2 key forces that act on a disc during flight: lift and drag. Lift is the force that allows the disc to stay airborne, and in flight it opposes the force of gravity on the disc's mass. The disc itself creates this lift force as it flies through the air. Because of the disc's curved shape, the airflow above it must travel at a higher velocity than that underneath. And as it travels along the curved edge, it follows that path and pushes down. This generates some lift on its own because, as we know, any force applied creates an equal and opposite force. But the faster air above also creates low pressure above and high pressure below the disc. This pressure difference provides even more lift. Drag is a resistant force on the disc, perpendicular to the lift, and it acts against the disc's movement through the air. The angle at which the disc is thrown, often called launch angle or the angle of attack, affects both lift and drag. You've probably noticed that a disc doesn't travel very far without spin. Spinning the disc helps it fly by supplying angular momentum, which helps keep the disc stable. The faster it spins, the more stable it should be. So to summarize, lift helps the disc stay in the air, while the spin creates stability. Now we know that disc golf discs are essentially a circular wing, and the edge of the wing is what primarily determines the stability of the disc. Typically, discs that are very aerodynamic are more understable, while less aerodynamic discs create a lot of drag to create overstability. Why would the blend of the plastic used to make the disc have such a huge impact on the stability of the disc? Well, there are a couple key factors at play. The first is how quickly the disc cools and how that can affect the entire shape of the disc. For example, if you look at these 2 Firebirds, you'll see some significant differences. This Star Firebird is relatively flat, while this DX Firebird has a little bit more of a dome. Beyond being flat or domey, the cooling of a disc can have an impact on the actual shape of the wing on the end of the rim. This changes the angle of attack and therefore the flight. One other thing that this can change is known as the parting line. Many disc golfers that have researched the flight and stability of discs will tell you that one of the best indicators for how a disc will fly relative to other discs of the same mold is the parting line height. Disc golf discs are typically made with a top and bottom mold. The parting line is where they meet in the center, and plastic often leaks out of that gap slightly and needs to be trimmed, leaving a faint line. The higher the parting line or closer to the flight plate, the more overstable the disc will typically fly, relative to other discs of the same mold. The inverse, however, is also true. The lower the parting line, the less stability. Another key factor is the density of the plastic. We're going to use MVP's fission plastic as an example. Fission plastic uses MVP's microbubble technology to add tiny air bubbles into the plastic, drastically reducing the weight of the flight plate relative to the rim, because fission plastic still uses MVP's traditional gyro rim technology, which uses a super dense outer rim and a much lighter flight plate, putting as much of the weight out to the outer edge of the wing as possible. This increases the gyroscopic stability of the disc, allowing it to maintain its stability in flight longer. This also creates a greater weight difference between the flight plate and the wing. However, if a plastic is less dense, which you can often feel in plastics like DX from Innova or Putter Blend from Discraft, the flight plate requires more material for it to be sturdy enough to hold up over time. This creates a lesser weight difference between the flight plate and the outer rim, and therefore less stability. Lastly, we can't talk stability without talking about flight numbers. If you've seen our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series, then you know that we love to hate to love flight numbers. But the reason that I bring that up is because many manufacturers take the approach of setting flight numbers for a specific mold, and then those remain the same regardless of what plastic they use. MVP Disc Sports is one exception. As we've talked about in previous videos, MVP is one of the only companies that changes the flight numbers based on the plastic, rating both their electron or cosmic electron based plastics as well as fission slightly more understable than the rest of their plastics. While MVP is one of the only ones that does this, they are not the only one who's taking flight numbers a little more seriously. And we have to give a lot of credit to Elevation Discs. Elevation Discs is the only brand in disc golf, to our knowledge, to change the flight numbers for a disc for each run of that disc. For example, the Run 1 Binks is rated as an 8501 straight fairway driver, but the newer, stiffer Run and EcoFlex rubber is rated at 85-31, much more understable. Similarly, the three different runs of Elevation Interceptor all have different flight numbers, with 5303, 54-12, and 54-21 respectively. So why don't other companies do this? Should we hold them to higher standards to help players have a better expectation of how a disc will fly? I don't know the right answer, but I'm curious your thoughts. So think about and comment below how you think manufacturers should handle flight numbers as it pertains to plastic. We're going to put several plastic-related myths to the test. The first is that premium plastic is always more overstable than base or mid-grade plastic. The next is that metal flake or glow plastics are more overstable than other premium plastics. And we'll also be testing to see if parting line height matches with the stability we observe in the discs that we're testing. And of course, we'll be looking for any other patterns that appear while we test and compare. All right, thank you, Greg, from last week. Let's see how these discs are going to fly in round 2. And we'll begin with the Mania FD. We'll be comparing the 169-gram C-Line FD with the 176-gram S-Line FD. Now, we didn't mention weight a lot in last week's video, other than to point out that most of the discs we were testing were just about the exact same weight, but these two FDs represent the largest weight difference that we've tested so far. Weight, of course, plays an important role in how a disc flies. Lighter discs are easier to throw faster, and therefore tend to be more understable. Let's take a look first at the S-Line FD. And Caleb puts this on just a little bit of hyzer, but it doesn't stay on hyzer for long, as soon as it flips over, it holds and holds and holds that turn for a nice, smooth, and hyzer line. Now, the C-Line FD. And it looks like it's holding a little bit straighter, really resisting turning over before dumping out with a lot of low speed fade. So clearly in this case, weight has nothing to do with it. But this result is not super surprising. In many of our different videos, we have tested the C-Line MD3, the PD, the DD3, and the P2. And in every single instance, they have been reliably overstable. When we looked at the Neo and Meta Essence last week, the parting line was nearly impossible to see, both with the plain eye and on camera. However, in this case, I think we can just about see that the C-Line FD is a touch higher than the S-Line. And while that alone can account for the difference in stability, it does fit with the myth that the higher the parting line height, the more stable that disc will be. Next, let's move on to the MVP Volt. We have the Volt in 4 different plastics: Cosmic Neutron, Neutron, Plasma, and Fission, ranging between 172 and 175 grams. And before we get into these throws, I do want to point out that there is a clear difference in shape for one of these discs. The Cosmic Neutron Volt in particular has a pronounced dome, while the other 3 plastics have only a slight dome and all look pretty similar to each other. And let's see if we can get all 4 of these shots on screen at once. We're going to begin first with the Neutron Volt. And now the Plasma. cosmic neutron, and finally, fission. And I'm really surprised with how little there is to choose between these volts. While there is a very slight variation in turn, all four of them had a very consistent, reliable fade. The parting line height doesn't offer much difference either. The fission plastic that says it's more understable is maybe the only one with a slightly lower parting line height, but all four of these flew almost exactly the same. Next, onto a pair of trespasses from Dynamic Discs. Both of these trespass are 173 gram. We have one in Lucid premium plastic, the other in prime burst base plastic. Now, we threw the trespass in our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series on destroyers, and it was one of the most understable discs with the same flight numbers as a destroyer. So we know what to expect in terms of overall flight. We should get a lot of turn, but what type of difference are we going to see between the premium and base plastic? First, let's see this with a lower arm speed from myself. And it looks like maybe the prime burst has just a touch more stability. And now with a faster arm speed from Caleb. For Caleb, both of these were really understable. Maybe the prime burst was just a little bit slower to turn over, but of course once they both turned, they were gone and off to the races. Now, of course, that prime burst plastic will beat in much faster than the Lucid plastic, so eventually it's going to become more understable. But it's interesting to see that it has just a touch more stability right out of the box. If we look at these side by side, we see not only is the parting line ever so slightly higher on the prime burst, but the whole wing actually looks a little bit higher. So perhaps that is what contributed to that slightly increased stability. Now onto two pairs of Innova discs. First up, the Animal. We have an Animal in KC Pro plastic at 175 grams and a 170 gram Star Animal. And to spice things up, let's look at the parting line height first, take a look at the shape of the discs, and then see if you can guess which one will be more stable. The Star Animal looks like it has a slightly higher parting line, but they both look a bit domey, so place your bets. And here we go. Now on my first throw here, I will admit I got the Star Animal just slightly nose up, but I think you can see both the Star and KC Pro Animal have pretty decent low speed fade. Caleb got a good rip on both of these, and they each flipped, got a little bit of turn, and finished pretty straight. There's not a lot to choose between these two discs, but the Star Animal looks to be just slightly more overstable than the KC Pro plastic. On to our second pair of Innova discs. This time we have two 180 gram rocks, one in DX plastic and the other in Star. These are both pretty domey again, and the parting line height shows a clear difference with the Star rock much higher than the DX rock. So how do you think they're going to fly? While the DX rock gets a little more turn, it also seems to get more fade. The Star rock has an overall more neutral flight, but trending overstable. Whether we can attribute that to the premium plastic or to the parting line height is hard to say, but it's only a slight difference. Finally now, the one you've all been waiting for, the Discraft Buzz. We have the Buzz in 5 different plastics to test today, including Z, Big Z, ESP, ESP Flex, and Titanium. All 5 of these buzzes are stickered at 177 grams plus. Caleb is going to be trying to throw all of these on just a slight hyzer to get a little bit of a flip up and a straight shot, which of course is the hallmark of the Buzz. Let's begin with a couple throws with the Titanium Buzz. The Titanium Buzz flips up nicely, gets just a slight turn before a gentle fade, exactly what you want from a Buzz. The second throw with the Titanium Buzz is almost identical, but just a little bit higher, giving it more time to fade. Let's compare that first to the ESP Buzz, and if we watch the lower line next to the Titanium Buzz, they look nearly identical. Again, if we put the ESP buzz higher in the air, it gets a little less turn, and again, just a bit more fade, just like the titanium buzz. So far, titanium and ESP are flying almost identical, and surprise, surprise, they have exactly the same parting line height. Next, let's see the Big Z buzz. If we first examine the parting line height against the ESP and titanium, Big Z does look a little bit higher. Parting line height has been pretty hit or miss so far across these two videos, so where do you think this buzz is going to end up? Let's find out. As you can see, the Big Z buzz clearly has more stability. It gets almost no turn at all before a nice smooth fade. On the second throw, it holds that slight hyzer for almost the entire flight. So, Big Z, slightly higher parting line, slightly more stability. Now onto Z plastic, and let's put that side by side with the Big Z buzz, and they flew almost exactly the same. However, this time, the parting line height doesn't match. The Z buzz is slightly lower than the Big Z, but in our experience, Z plastic often starts a bit more overstable than other Discraft plastics, and so that continues to be true. Finally, let's compare the most overstable buzz so far, Big Z, with our last buzz, ESP Flex. So Caleb maybe put a touch more hyzer on the ESP Flex buzz than the others, but it was never even close to turning over. It did not flip up at all and held this hyzer the entire flight. And this was consistent across every single throw with the ESP Flex buzz. In fact, it's why I don't bag this ESP Flex buzz. I got it at D-Glow last year, I tried it out, and it was just way too stable for me. So, from least to most overstable, we have the buzz in titanium, ESP, Z, Big Z, and finally, ESP Flex was our most overstable buzz. After over 100 throws of 12 different discs and 30 different plastics, all I can say is that these myths that we were testing are just that, myths. Premium plastic was not overstable on every single throw. The K3 Yarn, Delta Walker, Prime Burst Trespass, and 300A2 are all great examples of base plastic being every bit as stable, if not more stable, than their premium counterparts. We've had dozens of comments on previous videos about parting line height being the one true way to know whether a disc will be more or less overstable than another. But I think as we've proven across this testing, it's just not 100% accurate. And don't get me wrong, I would love to have something to help me predict and plan these videos a little bit better and know what to expect from discs, even just for my own game. But alas, that is not the case. Finally, the myth about glow and metal flake plastic is, I think at best for us, inconclusive. We didn't have too much glow plastic to test this time around, but the glow yarn was very understable compared to the others. Our only metal flake option was Meta plastic from Discmania, and I think we can do better in testing maybe metal flake, C-Line from Infinite, or Champion from Innova against some other blends to see if we can draw some more concrete conclusions. What are some myths about plastic that you'd like to see us test? Comment below your thoughts or suggestions. For now and for Six-Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or supporting us on Patreon. Your support makes this content possible. Clap. But if you didn't watch part 1, stick around while we explain why... Okay, so a little graphic. Greg from last week. Boop, boop, boop. But this week we have a much wider variety. And I have to stop recording for a second because the mail's here. Be right back. Missed the mail truck. Caleb starts us out on just a little bit of hyzer, but immediately gets a big flip and even more turn for a nice, big... What am I trying to say? Now, the parting line with Discmania's the Star Rock has just a hint more overstability than the DX Rock. Whether we have 5 buzzes to test today in looking to get a little flip up, straight buzz shot, which of course is their hallmark. We've had dozens of... Finally, with glow and metal fake...